The sky was washed with the soft glow of dusk, the sun just dipping below the rooftops, casting long shadows across the narrow alley. I'd only moved into this building a month ago, a compact place in the middle of the city, and yet tonight, it felt as if I'd been living here for years. My landlady, Sophia, had been helpful in her own quiet way, never intrusive, but always there. Like when she'd fixed the leaky faucet in my kitchen without being asked, or when she'd left a small basket of fresh herbs by my door. These gestures, little acts of care, left me wondering more about her each time I saw her. Tonight, I found myself on the balcony of my apartment, enjoying the mild spring air, feeling the weight of the week begin to slip away. That's when I noticed her, Sophia, on her balcony just across from mine, separated by a low iron railing and only a couple of feet of space. She was carrying a wine glass, her gaze trailing off into the fading sunset, a peaceful smile playing on her lips. It was as if she was lost in her own world, untouched by the chaos of the city around her. Her hair, dark and soft, flowed over her shoulders, catching the last rays of the sun. I turned my head, not wanting to intrude on her moment, yet there was something magnetic about her presence. From the corner of my eye, I saw her turn, a warm smile spreading across her face as she noticed me. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Her voice, low and almost musical, broke the silence between us. "Yeah, it's perfect," I replied, matching her smile. We shared a moment of quiet appreciation for the scene unfolding before us, the way the sky shifted from orange to purple, the stars just beginning to peek through. She lifted her glass slightly in my direction, as if inviting me into her world. "Would you like to join me for a glass?" I hesitated, a little caught off guard by the invitation, but I couldn't deny the curiosity that had been building since I moved in. "Sure, that sounds great," I replied, my heart giving an unexpected flutter. A few minutes later, I found myself stepping onto her balcony, greeted by the faint scent of jasmine and lavender from the small potted plants scattered around. Sophia had already poured a glass of deep red wine for me, holding it out as I approached. Her fingers brushed against mine as I took the glass, and though it was a fleeting touch, I felt a strange warmth spread through me. She leaned back against the railing, her posture relaxed and open, but her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, studied me intently. "I don't usually have guests up here," she admitted, swirling the wine in her glass. "But you seem different." I took a sip, savoring the rich, velvety taste, trying to calm the slight edge of nervousness that had crept up on me. "Different? How?" She laughed softly, a sound as smooth as the wine. "Just a feeling," she replied. She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "People in the city rush through everything, you know? They never pause to look around, to feel a moment. But I've seen you up here in the evenings, just existing." Her gaze softened. "That's rare." Her words took me by surprise, as if she'd reached in and read a part of me I hadn't even shared with anyone. "I guess I like the quiet," I admitted, a bit self-conscious now, but Sophia's presence had a way of drawing out honesty. "It's nice to just be, without expectations." She nodded, her expression understanding. The breeze picked up, and the scent of her perfume, something delicate yet earthy, drifted toward me, mingling with the cool air. I found myself leaning just a little closer, captivated by the quiet energy that seemed to radiate from her. The city sounds faded, leaving just the two of us in this small, elevated haven. She tilted her head, her gaze intense yet unreadable. "You don't seem like the type who has too many expectations, but sometimes even the quiet ones have hidden desires." The words hung between us, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. There was something about the way she looked at me, a challenge in her eyes mixed with genuine curiosity, as if she wanted me to open up and reveal every secret I'd ever kept hidden. Sophia's hand brushed against my arm, and I felt a shiver run through me. It was innocent, barely a touch, but it lingered. Do you? What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She leaned a little closer, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Have hidden desires? Oh, you thought something of the sort about Bridget, and she smiled, looking me right in the eyes. Her words seemed to pierce through me, leaving me exposed. I swallowed hard, feeling my pulse quicken. I wanted to answer, but I couldn't find the words, couldn't put the strange longing I felt into anything coherent. She seemed to sense this, her hand still resting lightly on my arm, her touch both comforting and electrifying. Then she took a small step back, the corner of her mouth quirking up in a half smile. I think I'll leave that as a mystery, she said, her tone teasing. After all, some things are best left unsaid. Her words felt like a gentle nudge, a promise of something unspoken, and I found myself wanting to know more about her, about the thoughts hidden behind those dark, knowing eyes. I could feel the tension between us thickening, unspoken yet palpable, as if we were both waiting for the other to make the next move. She sipped her wine, her gaze never leaving mine, and I realized then just how close we were standing. Her fingers lightly traced the rim of her glass, her eyes flickering down to my lips before meeting my gaze once more. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the moment felt charged, like we were both teetering on the edge of something forbidden yet irresistible. Before I could stop myself, I reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. My fingers lingered near her cheek, and she didn't pull back. In fact, she seemed to lean into the touch, her eyes closing briefly, as if savoring the sensation. When she opened them again, there was a glimmer of something raw, unguarded. Yes, heart beating. Thank you for coming up, she whispered, her voice barely audible, filled with an intensity that made my breath hitch. I wouldn't have missed it, I replied, surprised at the truth of my own words. We stood there in silence, the tension between us simmering, our breaths mingling in the night air, and for that brief moment, it felt like there was no one else in the world but us. It's a special breath of fresh air. I stood there, half in a daze, feeling the weight of that silence between us as it wrapped around me. Sophia's gaze held me there, her eyes flickering with something that was hard to interpret, yet impossible to ignore. She looked down at her glass, swirling the wine as if it held some kind of answer. And the tension was so thick, it was almost suffocating. When she finally looked up again, her eyes were softer, vulnerable even. You know, it's rare to meet someone who fits in a moment like this. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, and her words seemed to echo within me. How do you mean? I asked, my voice a little shaky, feeling a strange thrill at the way she was looking at me, like she was letting me see something usually hidden, something reserved. Sophia set her glass down on the narrow balcony table, the sound soft and decisive in the night air. She stepped closer, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her, her eyes holding mine, as if they were the only anchors left in the world. Someone who doesn't need to say anything to understand. Her hand reached out, fingers brushing the fabric of my sleeve. It was a simple gesture, and yet it felt like she was reaching into my thoughts, peeling back every guard I'd ever put up. I could feel my pulse thrumming in my throat, and in that moment, everything else faded into a distant blur. My thoughts narrowed to her touch, her closeness, the way she looked at me like she could see straight through every carefully constructed layer I'd hidden behind. And then she let her hand linger, her fingers lightly pressing into the fabric, her gaze searching my face. "Tell me," she murmured, her voice low, barely above a whisper, "what do you really want?" I felt the words lodge in my throat, the simple questions slicing through me, rooting me to the spot. What did I want? I wanted, I wasn't sure. I wanted her, maybe. But more than that, I wanted this moment to keep stretching, to stay just as it was, wrapped in the quiet allure of an unspoken promise. I swallowed, searching for something to say, feeling that this was a crossroads, a moment I couldn't take back. And yet, in the warmth of her presence, the smell of jasmine and lavender drifting around us, I found my voice. "I'm not sure, but I don't want this to end," I confessed, my words spilling out, raw and unfiltered. Sophia's eyes softened, a small smile ghosting across her lips, and in the quiet intimacy of that shared space, she let her hand slide down my arm, her touch gentle but lingering. "Good," she replied softly, her voice carrying a warmth that wrapped around me like a soft blanket. "Because I don't want it to end either." We stood there, the sounds of the city a faint hum beneath us, the night wrapped around us like a blanket, cocooning us from the rest of the world. There was something in the way she looked at me, something that spoke to a part of me I hadn't even realized was there, a part that yearned for connection, for depth, for something more than fleeting interactions and shallow conversations. Her fingers brushed against mine, tentative, testing, and in a quiet breath, I found myself intertwining them with hers. It was a small act, a subtle shift, but it felt monumental, as if we'd just crossed an invisible line neither of us could return from. She squeezed my hand gently, her eyes flickering with a spark of something raw, unguarded. "Would you like to stay a while longer?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her gaze never leaving mine. I nodded, words failing me. I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay here, to hold on to this fragile, exquisite tension that hung between us, to feel her touch and her presence, as though it was the only thing grounding me to the moment. Sophia took a small step back, her hand sliding from mine as she moved toward the table, lifting a small, delicate glass lantern I hadn't noticed before. She struck a match, lighting the candle within, and a soft, warm glow filled the balcony, casting her features in gentle light, her face half shadowed, her eyes gleaming with a mysterious allure. She set the lantern on the edge of the table, her gaze slipping back to me as she leaned casually against the railing, her arms crossed loosely in front of her. "Tell me," she said, her voice smooth, calming, "what drew you to this city?" She set the lantern on the edge of the table, her voice smooth, calming. "What drew you to this city?" I shrugged, feeling the weight of her question. It was a fresh start, I suppose. Somewhere new, different. I wanted a change. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she was searching for something deeper beneath the words. "A change from what?" she asked icily. Her question struck a chord, and for a moment I felt exposed, vulnerable. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. From everything. Life was just too predictable, too ordinary. I wanted something else, something I couldn't quite put into words, something that felt more. Sophia nodded, her gaze intense, yet understanding. She looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing small circles on the glass of her wine, as if lost in thought. "I think I understand," she murmured, her voice thoughtful. "Sometimes life becomes so safe, so predictable, that it feels like we're losing pieces of ourselves along the way." Her words resonated with something deep within me, something I hadn't even realized was there. Exactly. It's like I was just existing, not really living. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, a flicker of something raw and genuine crossing her face. "Then, maybe you're in the right place." Her voice was soft, almost wistful. "Maybe you came here because you were meant to." Mm. The intimacy of her words washed over me, and I felt a shiver run through me, a strange, inexplicable feeling that left me both unsettled and exhilarated. "And what about you?" I asked, my voice steady but quiet. "Why are you here?" Sophia's gaze turned distant, thoughtful. She took a sip of her wine, as if gathering her thoughts, before replying. "I suppose, in a way, I was searching too, for something real, something that made me feel alive." I felt my pulse quicken at her words, at the vulnerability in her voice. "And did you find it?" I asked, my own voice barely a whisper. For a moment she didn't answer, her gaze locked on mine, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Perhaps, but it's still unfolding." Her eyes held mine, her gaze steady, unblinking, as if she was willing me to understand something unspoken. The air between us felt electric, charged with an intensity that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I took a step closer, my hand reaching out instinctively, brushing against hers. She didn't pull away, her fingers curling around mine, her touch warm and steady. We stood there, our fingers intertwined, the weight of everything unspoken, hanging heavy between us. In that moment, it felt as though there were no walls, no barriers between us, just two souls, drawn together by something neither of us could fully explain. Sophia's hand tightened around mine, her gaze growing more intense, and for a brief, exhilarating moment, I felt as though I could see straight into her heart, into the depths of who she was. It was terrifying, and yet I didn't want to look away. "I don't think I felt like this before," I admitted, my voice barely audible, the words spilling out before I could stop them. She smiled, a soft, knowing smile that sent a thrill through me. "Then, maybe it's exactly what you needed," she replied, her voice filled with quiet certainty. We stood there, lost in each other, the world around us fading into the background, until all that was left was the soft glow of the lantern, the warmth of her hand in mine, and the gentle thrum of our shared heartbeat in the night. The world around us felt distant, barely there, as if we were suspended in time, held within the glow of that single flickering lantern. The shadows danced across Sophia's face, tracing over her features and casting them in a light so soft it felt surreal. My heart was pounding, and the air between us was thick, laden with words unspoken. Every brief touch, Sophia shifted, her fingers lingering on mine before she let go, moving to the railing, her gaze sweeping over the city below. "Sometimes," she began, her voice carrying a wistful note, "we meet people who remind us of parts of ourselves we'd forgotten, things we didn't know we were missing." She looked at me, a small, almost vulnerable smile touching her lips. "Have you ever felt that?" I nodded, the words catching in my throat as I tried to find a way to express the tumult of emotions her question stirred. "Yes, I think I'm feeling it right now." She gave a soft, almost imperceptible nod, and I felt her gaze settle on me again, warm and steady. Her eyes held mine, and the silence that stretched between us was unlike any I'd ever experienced. It wasn't empty, it was full of questions, of promises, of a shared understanding that had formed between us in these brief, fleeting moments. Without thinking, I stepped closer, reaching out and brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Sophia closed her eyes at the touch, a soft sigh escaping her, and when she opened them again, there was something in her gaze that took my breath away. I could feel her hand resting on my arm, and her touch sent a shiver through me, a warmth that lingered, wrapping around me like the soft glow of the lantern. And then, before I could fully process what I was doing, I leaned in, our faces just inches apart. Her breath mingled with mine, and I could feel the faintest hint of jasmine and lavender from her perfume. The tension was palpable, the quiet pull between us undeniable, and when our lips finally met, it was like a spark igniting. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, as if we were both testing the waters, but the hesitation quickly melted away. She leaned into me, her hand slipping to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. Her lips were warm, inviting, and I could feel the years of restraint, of unspoken longing, unraveling in that single shared moment. My hands found her waist, and I held her there, feeling the slight tremble in her as she pressed closer, her body fitting against mine, as though we'd always been meant to find each other. Like this. Sophia pulled back slightly, her eyes searching mine, and I could see the same mix of excitement and vulnerability there. Her hand lingered on my cheek, her thumb tracing a gentle line across my skin, and I realized I was holding my breath, afraid that the moment might slip away. "What are we doing?" I whispered, the question more for myself than for her, but Sophia only smiled, a soft, knowing smile that made my heart ache. "Living," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, her fingers tracing down my neck before settling over my heart. Sometimes that's all we need to do. The words hung between us, settling into the quiet space around us, and I realized then just how profoundly she had changed something within me. In the short time I'd known her, Sophia had awakened a part of me that I hadn't even realized was there, a part that yearned for connection, for intimacy, for something real and raw and unfiltered. Her hands slipped to my shoulders, and I felt myself being pulled closer, drawn back into her warmth, her presence, the quiet intensity that radiated from her in waves. She kissed me again, deeper this time, her fingers tangling in my hair, and I felt the last remnants of restraint dissolve as I lost myself in her completely. We stood there, entwined, wrapped in each other, and the world around us seemed to fade to nothing. I felt her hand slide down my arm, her touch soft yet insistent, and before I knew it, we were stepping inside, the door clicking shut behind us. The city lights outside cast a faint glow into the room, and in the dim light, Sophia's eyes shone, filled with an unguarded, vulnerable intensity that made my heart melt. She reached up, her fingers brushing along my jawline as she pulled me in once more, her kiss hungry and filled with a depth of emotion that left me breathless. I could feel her body pressed against mine, her warmth seeping into me, grounding me, and in that moment, it felt as though I'd been waiting my entire life to feel this close to someone, to be seen in the way that she saw me. Her hand slid down my chest, lingering there for a moment before she pulled me even closer. The world outside felt a million miles away, and in the quiet darkness, it was just us, two people drawn together by an unspoken need, a desire that defied explanation. Every kiss, every touch felt like a promise a quiet declaration of everything we couldn't put into words. And then, as we stood there, lost in each other, Sophia whispered something soft, something I could barely make out, but that made my heart ache with a longing I hadn't known was possible. "Stay," she breathed, her voice filled with a quiet, raw vulnerability that left me reeling. "Just stay," I nodded, unable to find the words to express the intensity of what I felt. Instead, I pulled her close, our breaths mingling, and in that silent embrace, I felt as though every piece of me had finally come together. We moved in sync, our hands finding each other, our bodies entwined, and as we sank into the moment, I knew that this was something I would carry with me forever. The hours slipped by in a haze of quiet intimacy, of soft whispers and gentle touches. There was no rush, no urgency, just a slow, steady unfolding of everything we had kept hidden. I felt her fingers trace along my skin, felt the warmth of her breath against my neck, and in the quiet darkness, we shared something that went beyond words. When dawn began to break, casting the faintest glow across the room, we lay there, wrapped in each other's arms, a silence settling over us that was comfortable, peaceful. Sophia's head rested on my chest, her breathing steady, and I felt a profound sense of contentment, a quiet joy that filled every corner of me. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window, she lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw in her gaze the same reflection of what I felt, a deep, quiet connection, something that went beyond anything I'd ever known. "Thank you," she whispered, her fingers tracing light circles on my chest, a soft smile touching her lips. "For what?" I asked, my voice hushed, afraid to disturb the fragile beauty of the moment. "For being here, for everything," she replied, her voice filled with a warmth that made my heart ache. I pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, and in that embrace, I felt a sense of peace, of belonging, that I hadn't even realized I was missing. It was as if, in finding Sophia, I had found a part of myself, a piece that had been waiting, hidden, all along. We stayed there, wrapped in each other, as the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow over us. And in the quiet comfort of her arms, I knew that whatever lay ahead, I would carry this moment with me, a cherished memory of the night that had changed everything. Our lives would go on, paths winding through the city, intersecting at random moments. But this was ours, a secret, an understanding that would forever bind us in ways that no words could express.